I drove the same stretch of highway 3 times. The first time I drove that stretch of highway, it was just after dusk. I'd left the city late to avoid traffic, which meant I hit the rural interstate just as the last of the light was draining out of the sky. It wasn't a dramatic sunset, just a dull orange seam along the horizon, like something closing. The highway cut through flat farmland for miles before entering a low forested corridor. I'd driven it before during the day, 2 lanes each direction, a narrow median with cable barriers, occasional green exit signs every 5 or 10 miles. Nothing remarkable. I set my cruise control to 70 and let the headlights take over. There's a particular rhythm to night driving. White dashed lines sliding under the hood, reflective posts ticking past at even intervals. The road becomes less a place and more a moving tunnel of light. You stop thinking about geography. You think in distances. 10 miles to the next exit, 5 miles to the rest area, 23 miles to the county line. The GPS said I had 42 miles until my turnoff. The first irregularity was so small I almost didn't notice it. The exit for mile 184 appeared sooner than I expected. I knew roughly where it should have been, around 15 minutes in. But I'd only been driving maybe 10. I checked the clock. 8:47 p.m. I'd merged onto the highway at 8:36, 11 minutes. At 70 miles an hour, that was close enough to plausible. I told myself I'd misremembered the exact mileage. The green sign flashed past, reflective letters momentarily blinding in the high beams. Mile 184, County Road 6, 1/2 mile. The sign itself looked normal. Maybe I'd just zoned out. The road remained empty except for the occasional semi drifting in the opposite direction, their headlights swelling and vanishing like slow comets. The radio hummed low. I kept my eyes fixed ahead. Another 10 minutes passed. Then I saw the sign again. Mile 184, County Road 6, 1/2 mile. At first, I thought it was for mile 185, and I'd misread it. But as I drew closer, the numbers were unmistakable. Same exit name, same slight tilt in the right corner of the sign, like it had been clipped by wind or a truck mirror. I glanced at the odometer. I had driven 22 miles since entering the highway. That wasn't possible. I checked the GPS. It still showed 31 miles remaining to my turnoff. The blue route line was steady. No reroutes, no recalculations. I told myself there must be 2 mile 184 markers in different counties. Maybe the numbering reset at some boundary I hadn't noticed. Rural highways did strange administrative things. The exit ramp appeared to the right, curving away into darkness. I stayed on the highway. The second time I passed it, I felt a mild unease, but not fear, more like the irritation of realizing you've misunderstood something simple, a missed detail, a wrong assumption. The highway began to enter the wooded stretch I remembered. Trees closed in on both sides. The median narrowed slightly. My headlights caught the silver cables strung between posts. The forest felt denser than I remembered. Branches leaned closer to the road. The canopy seemed to swallow more of the sky. I could barely see the stars now. The GPS chimed softly. In 20 miles, take exit 201. That was my exit. Good, linear, predictable. I focused on that number, 20 miles. The road curved gently left, then right. I passed mile marker 190. 5 minutes later, I passed mile marker 188. I felt my stomach tighten. I slowed slightly down to 65. Maybe I'd misread 198 as 190 earlier. Reflective signs can blur at night. Numbers invert in the mind. But I was certain I'd seen 190. I began paying closer attention. Mile marker 187, then 186. They were counting down. That meant I was driving south. But I had entered the highway heading north. I was absolutely certain of that. My destination was north. The GPS route arrow pointed up when I started. I looked at the compass on the dashboard. N, north. I stayed in the right lane, pulse quickening just slightly. The next green sign rose from the darkness. Mile 184, County Road 6, 1/2 mile the third time. The exact same tilt in the metal, the same dark smear near the bottom post. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. This wasn't 2 exits with the same number. This was the same exit. I checked the time, 9:12 p.m. I had been on this highway for 36 minutes. At an average of 70 miles an hour, I should have traveled over 40 miles. I should have reached my exit already. The GPS still calmly insisted, in 20 miles take exit 201. It had not changed. Not 19 miles, not 18, 20. I considered pulling over, but the shoulder here was narrow, bordered by trees that pressed close. The idea of stopping in that corridor felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Instead, I decided to test something. When the exit ramp appeared again, I would take it, see where it led. The sign appeared ahead, reflective and indifferent. Mile 184, County Road 6, 1/2 mile. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The ramp curved gently right. I signaled and exited. The moment my car left the highway, the darkness deepened. The road narrowed to a single lane without a median. No street lights, just my headlights carving a thin path forward. The exit ramp curved for longer than it should have. It didn't straighten quickly into a county road like I expected. It spiraled gently downward, trees crowding closer, the guardrail hugging tight. The curve continued and continued. I checked the odometer. I had traveled 1.4 miles since leaving the highway. An exit ramp should not be 1.4 miles long. My headlights swept over the same white reflector post 3 times. I'm sure of it. A small crack in its plastic lens caught the light each time in the same way. The road was looping, but the steering wheel was held steady. The curve felt continuous, not circular. No sharp turns, no sense of doubling back, just a prolonged descent that never leveled out. The forest began to thin. Ahead, I saw the green glow of highway signage. My breath caught. The ramp merged back onto the highway. I had re-entered the same interstate. The sign overhead read, North City, 42 miles, 42 miles. Exactly what it had said when I first merged onto the highway. I checked the clock. 9:18 p.m. Only 6 minutes had passed since I exited. That wasn't possible. I had driven at least 2 miles down that ramp alone. I stayed in the right lane, heart beating harder now. The forest corridor returned. The trees leaned in close. The next mile marker I passed read, not approaching. Not warning of an exit, just the white roadside marker. I felt something shift inside my perception. Not the world itself, not yet, but my confidence in how it was arranged. It wasn't that I was lost, it was that the highway was folding. Not dramatically, not impossibly, just subtly reusing itself, like a looping strip of film. The reflective posts along the right shoulder began to feel unevenly spaced. Some appeared too soon after the last. Others took longer than they should have. The dashed white lines on the road seemed slightly shorter, or longer, I couldn't tell. The forest pressed closer. The median cables seemed nearer to my lane than before. I tried to use external references, the moon, a distant radio tower, but the trees swallowed everything beyond the immediate cone of headlights. The GPS chimed again. In 20 miles, take exit 201. The voice was calm, unchanged. I reached forward and turned the volume down to 0. The silence inside the car was immediate and heavy. For a moment, I considered the simplest explanation: fatigue. I had worked a long week. My perception of time could be skewed. I could be misreading signs. Anxiety could distort memory. Highways at night can create dissociation. There are documented cases of drivers entering trance-like states, missing exits, misjudging distance. That explanation felt solid, grounded. I focused on my breathing. Inhale, exhale. The next green sign emerged. Mile 184, County Road 6, 1/2 mile. But something was different. The tilt in the sign's corner was gone. It stood perfectly straight. And beneath the main text, in smaller reflective letters that hadn't been there before, was an additional line. Return ramp. 42 miles, I slowed to 50. My headlights illuminated the exit ramp. It did not curve away into darkness this time. It ran parallel to the highway, separated by a thin strip of grass and a guardrail. And as I drove past it, I realized there were headlights on that ramp, a car moving at exactly my speed. Its beams cut forward, illuminating trees I couldn't see from my angle. I couldn't make out the vehicle's shape, just the twin lights. Keeping pace, I accelerated slightly. The other headlights did too. I slowed. They slowed. The two roads, mine and the ramp, remained side by side longer than any normal exit configuration would allow. I glanced over fully. For a brief second, I saw the silhouette of the car. It looked exactly like mine. Same model, same faint dent above the rear wheel. The driver's side window reflected my headlights. I couldn't see inside. Then the ramp gently curved away. The other car's headlights drifted out of view. The highway ahead was empty again. The GPS screen flickered. The blue route line shrank. Recalculated. In 20 miles, take exit 201. Still 20. I don't know how long I kept driving after that. The mile markers stopped appearing altogether. The dashed white lines grew irregular, some longer, some nearly touching. The forest no longer felt like it was on either side of the highway. It felt closer, as if the road had narrowed without me noticing. Eventually, I saw a glow ahead. Not green signage, not headlights. A diffuse amber glow. Streetlights. I felt relief wash through me. Civilization. The highway widened. The trees pulled back. An overhead sign appeared. City limits. 42 miles. 42 miles. I slowed gradually until I was barely moving. The sign looked old, rusted slightly at the edges, but intact. Behind it, the highway stretched forward into darkness. No visible buildings. No visible intersections. Just the suggestion of light farther ahead. I checked the clock. 8:36 p.m. Exactly the time I had merged onto the highway the first time. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. I considered turning around, but the median cables prevented any easy maneuver, so I did the only thing that felt controlled. I took the next exit. This time, the ramp was short, straight. It ended at a small gravel turnout. No buildings, no crossroad, just a wooden sign that read, "Highway begins an arrow," pointing back toward the on-ramp. I parked the car, turned off the engine. The silence pressed in immediately. After a moment, I stepped out. The night air felt normal, cool, still. I walked to the wooden sign and ran my hand over the letters. They were freshly carved, sharp edges, clean wood grain. I turned slowly to face the on-ramp. From this angle, I could see the highway stretching upward into darkness. And about a mile up, headlights, a car merging onto the road. Same speed I had taken, same steady pace. I watched it enter the highway, watched it settle into the right lane, watched it pass the first green sign. Mile 184, County Road 6, 1/2 mile. The sign tilted slightly at the corner, exactly as I remembered. The car's taillights glowed faintly red as it continued forward. After a few seconds, I could no longer see it. I stood there for a long time, trying to settle on an explanation. A closed loop of frontage roads, poor signage, a construction detour I hadn't noticed, fatigue-induced misperception layered over ordinary infrastructure, all of it plausible, all of it reasonable. Eventually, I got back into my car. I checked the clock again, 8:36 p.m. The engine turned over smoothly. I merged onto the highway, set the cruise control to 70, and as the forest began to close in around the road, I watched for the green sign ahead, trying to notice this time exactly when it changed. I'd hiked sections of the Appalachian Trail before, not the full expanse, nothing heroic, just the manageable stretches that let me pretend, briefly, that I understood the wilderness. That morning had been ordinary in the most reassuring way. The parking lot at the trailhead was half full, a blue sedan with a kayak strapped to the roof, a dusty pickup with a "See You at Springer" bumper sticker. The air smelled faintly of pine sap warming in the sun. Late October, but not yet cold enough to bite. I remember tightening my boot laces and checking my watch. 11:12 a.m. Plenty of daylight. The trail began clearly marked, the familiar white blazes bright against gray bark. Leaves the color of rust in amber carpeted the ground. The forest felt open, breathable. I settled into the rhythm quickly. Boots compressing leaves, breath steady, shoulders loosening with each mile. The first subtle wrongness arrived without drama. A fallen tree lay across the path about 40 minutes in. That wasn't unusual. Storms had passed through earlier in the week. I stepped over it, brushing flakes of bark from my palm. The bark felt strangely cool, almost damp, though the air was dry. On the other side of the log, the trail seemed narrower, not overgrown, just less certain. The blazes were still there, but they appeared farther apart than before, as if someone had quietly stretched the forest between them. I told myself I was imagining it. The Appalachians have a way of repeating themselves. Oak, maple, hickory, ridgeline after ridgeline. It's easy to feel like you've seen the same slope twice. About an hour later, I passed a distinctive cluster of 3 birches growing from the same root system. Their white trunks leaned together like conspirators. I noticed them because one had a lightning scar spiraling down its length. 10 minutes after that, I saw them again, or trees exactly like them. I stopped. The trail curved gently downhill. I hadn't turned around. I was certain of that. I checked my phone out of habit. No service, as expected, but the GPS map still loaded. The blue dot placed me exactly where I should be. I stared at the birches until the forest resumed its ordinary stillness. There are only so many ways trees can grow, I reasoned. Patterns repeat. That's what forests do. I kept walking. The light began to shift sometime after 2 p.m. Not dimmer, not yet, just flatter. The contrast drained from the colors. Leaves that had been burning orange now looked brown. The sky, glimpsed through branches, had turned from open blue to a muted slate. My sense of distance started to feel unreliable. A bend in the trail would look close, 20 yards maybe, but take twice that to reach. When I glanced back, the stretch I'd just walked seemed longer than it had any right to be. The forest grew quieter, not silent, just less layered. Earlier, there had been bird calls threading through the trees, the dry ticking of insects in leaf litter. Now there was mostly wind, and even that felt distant, like it was moving through a different section of woods. I became aware of my breathing. It sounded louder than it should have. At some point, I realized I hadn't seen another hiker in over an hour. That too wasn't unusual. It was a weekday, late in the season, but the absence pressed in on me. I checked the time again. 3:17 p.m. Still plenty of daylight, I told myself, even as the shadows lengthened at an unnatural angle, stretching thin and sideways rather than back toward the trees. The trail began to incline steadily. My calves burned. I focused on the physicality of it, counting steps, adjusting my pack straps, sipping water. At the top of the rise, the forest opened into a small clearing. I knew immediately I hadn't seen it on the map. It wasn't large, maybe 30 feet across. The grass was flattened in an uneven oval, as though something heavy had rested there. Not recently, just enough to leave an impression. I stood at the edge of it, unwilling to cross. There were no tracks, no campfire remnants, no trash. Just that flattened space, ringed by trees that leaned inward slightly, their branches interlacing overhead. A faint sound drifted through the clearing, a soft rhythmic crunch, like someone walking slowly through leaves. I turned toward it, expecting to see another hiker emerging from the trees. Nothing. The sound stopped. I told myself it was an animal, deer maybe, or the echo of my own movement, delayed and distorted by the slope. I crossed the clearing quickly. On the other side, the trail resumed, but it no longer felt continuous. The blazes seemed faded here. One tree bore 2 white marks, one above the other, as if someone had corrected a mistake. The forest darkened faster than it should have. By 4 p.m., the light resembled late dusk. I quickened my pace, though I wasn't entirely sure in which direction the trailhead lay anymore. My GPS still insisted I was moving north along the marked path. Then I heard it again. The crunch. Behind me. Slow. Measured. Matching my cadence with a half-second delay. I stopped walking. The forest inhaled with me. Silence. When I resumed, softer this time, the sound returned. 2 steps after mine. Then 3. I told myself the dry leaves were shifting downslope. Gravity, not pursuit. But the terrain had leveled out. I resisted the urge to look back for as long as I could. When I finally did, the trail behind me seemed narrower than before. The trees stood closer together. The path I had just walked appeared subtly concave, as though it dipped inward. There was no one there. I laughed once too loudly. "You're fine," I said to the trees. My voice felt absorbed immediately, swallowed without echo. The next unsettling detail was so small I nearly dismissed it. The white blazes had changed height. Earlier they had been at eye level. Now they appeared lower, around chest height. I crouched slightly, measuring them against my own body. Had I misremembered? Had the terrain risen around me? I straightened, and for a split second, I felt the distinct sensation that something behind me had also straightened. Not a sound, just the impression of synchronized movement. The air cooled abruptly. My breath began to show faintly. That shouldn't have happened so quickly. I checked my phone again. 4:26 p.m. The battery, which had been at 78%, now read 41%. I hadn't used it beyond brief glances. I turned to orient myself with the slope of the land. The Appalachians are predictable that way. Ridges, valleys, drainage lines. If I followed water downhill, I'd eventually reach a road. That was when I realized I hadn't heard running water in hours. In these mountains, there's almost always a trickle somewhere, a stream threading between rocks, a distant rush. Now there was nothing, not even wind. The forest had achieved a kind of padded stillness, as if insulated. I began walking faster. The crunching behind me resumed, no longer delayed, perfectly synchronized, step for step. I stopped. It stopped. I stepped once, sharply, to test it. The second crunch followed immediately, closer than it had been. My mouth went dry. I didn't turn around this time. Instead, I listened. There was something in the silence now, a density, the sense of volume being occupied. The fear shifted gradually, almost gently. I had been worried about being lost. Now I was calculating distance. How many feet behind me? If I ran, would it run? I started forward again, slower. The sound matched me exactly. I tried to convince myself it was an auditory illusion, the echo of leaves compressing beneath my own boots. But echoes don't breathe. I could hear it now. Soft, controlled inhalations that aligned too closely with my own. The trail curved sharply left. For a moment, as I rounded it, I caught sight of movement between two trees. Not a shape, not a figure, just the suggestion of verticality where there should have been empty space. I froze. The movement ceased. The trees stood motionless, their bark pale in the fading light. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. Another hiker keeping distance, a trick of light, fatigue. I forced myself to turn around fully. The trail behind me stretched empty and unbroken, but the leaves there were disturbed, not chaotically, in a single line, as though something had been stepping precisely where I stepped. The indentation of my boots overlapped by something slightly narrower. I knelt to examine it. The impressions were subtle, too subtle. If I hadn't been looking for them, I would have missed them. They ended abruptly a few feet behind me, not fading, stopping. The light dropped another degree. The sky between branches was nearly black. My phone read 5:02 p.m. Impossible. I had not walked that long. The battery was at 19%. I turned in a slow circle. The forest no longer felt expansive. It felt arranged. The trees stood equidistant, evenly spaced in a way that forests are not. The ground beneath them was smoother than before, the leaf cover thinner, as if something had been moving through regularly. I listened. No crunching, no breathing, just my own pulse in my ears. And then, a single deliberate step behind me. Not mimicked, not synchronized, independent. I did not look. I don't remember deciding to walk again, but I did. Not running. Running would acknowledge it. The step followed, closer. The air at my back felt displaced, slightly warmer than the surrounding cold. I became acutely aware of the space between my shoulder blades. Every few yards I passed a tree marked with a white blaze, each one slightly lower than the last, as if the trail itself were descending, not in elevation, but in intention. The forest darkened completely. My phone died in my hand. I stood in total blackness, and in that blackness, I heard breathing that was not mine. Slow, measured, right behind me. There is a reasonable explanation for what happened next. Search and rescue found me the following morning, less than 2 miles from the trailhead. I had apparently veered off onto an unmarked side path and walked in a slow, looping circle until exhaustion set in. Mild hypothermia, dehydration, disorientation. They told me auditory hallucinations are common under stress, that forests can distort perception, especially near dusk, that white blazes vary in height. All of it made sense, mostly. But when I cleaned my boots at home, days later, I noticed something embedded in the tread. A thin strip of white paint, fresh, and I still don't remember kneeling close enough to a tree to scrape it off. I took the fire lookout job because I wanted quiet. Not silence exactly, just distance. Distance from the city, from the constant low-frequency hum of traffic and people and notifications. The tower sat on a ridge 3 miles from the nearest service road, another 2 from the ranger station. It hadn't been used regularly in years. Satellite imaging had replaced most of the old watch posts, but budget cuts meant a handful of them were still staffed during peak wildfire season. The tower was a narrow wooden structure pinned into granite, 4 stories high with a glass cab at the top. From up there, the forest stretched in every direction, a textured green ocean broken by stone outcrops, and a thin silver river that bent like wire through the valley. My cabin, if you could call it that, was inside the glass enclosure. A cot, a desk, a radio, a propane stove, and a set of binoculars bolted to a circular metal mount in the center. The first week was uneventful. Wind moved through the trees in long, patient sighs. Ravens drifted past at eye level. At sunset, the sky burned down to violet and ash. Across the valley, on a smaller ridge, stood another lookout tower. It was older than mine, thinner, slightly crooked at the top, like it had been built before anyone's standardized measurements. I could see it clearly with the binoculars. Its windows were dark and reflective. The ranger who dropped me off had mentioned it in passing. Decommissioned, he said. Been empty for 15 years. Access trail washed out. It stood about a mile away, maybe a little more, close enough that on clear days I could see the warped boards near its base. The first time I noticed the light, I thought it was the sun catching the glass. It was late afternoon. I had been charting wind direction when something flickered in the corner of my eye, a small square of brightness in the other tower's window. I turned, expecting glare, but the sun was behind me. The valley lay in shadow. The square remained. It wasn't bright, just a soft, steady amber glow, like someone had left a lantern burning inside. I told myself it had to be reflection, maybe a vehicle passing far below. Maybe one of the new automated monitoring systems had been installed without anyone mentioning it. Still, I watched until dusk swallowed the ridge. The light stayed on long after the sky went black. I radioed the ranger station. Probably trespassers, the dispatcher said. Hikers do dumb things. We'll check it in the morning. But no one came the next day. The road had been closed for debris removal. The second night, the light came on again. This time I saw it happen. One moment the windows were dark. The next, a faint interior glow. No flicker of ignition. No gradual brightening. Just on. It stayed that way until dawn. Through binoculars, I tried to make out movement. I saw nothing but the empty interior and the suggestion of a desk shape near the window. I told myself I must be seeing the shadow of the window frame. On the third day, I decided to measure the distance between the towers more precisely. There were markers on my topographic map. According to scale, the other lookout should have been 1.3 miles away, slightly northeast. But when I aligned my compass with the ridge, the bearing seemed off. The tower sat more directly east than my map suggested. I adjusted for magnetic declination. It was still off. I assumed I'd misread something. That evening, clouds rolled in low and heavy. Visibility dropped. The other tower vanished behind gray. When the light came on, I could see it through the mist. A muted square, suspended in fog. It looked closer. That was the first thought that unsettled me. Not that it was lit. Not that it was empty. Closer. I took out the binoculars and focused. The image snapped sharp. The wood grain along its support beams was clearer than it had been before. I could make out individual nails along the ladder. I lowered the binoculars and stared with the naked eye. The tower seemed no larger than usual, but when I raised them again, the magnification felt unnecessary, as if I were looking at something only a few hundred yards away. I checked the focus wheel. It was dialed correctly. That night, I barely slept. In the morning, the fog lifted. The other tower stood where it always had. Distant, small, harmless. I laughed at myself. Perspective changes in weather. Light bends. The brain misjudges scale against uniform backgrounds. I'd read about that before taking the job. Still, I decided to mark the tree line beneath the other tower's ridge in my field notebook. Small, distinct notches in the silhouette. A split pine, a bare patch of rock, a slanted fir. That afternoon, I studied them through the binoculars. The split pine was gone. Not fallen. Gone. In its place stood a cluster of thinner trees. I stared for a long time, flipping back through my notebook. I had sketched it roughly, a forked trunk shaped like a tuning fork. The rock patch was still there. The slanted fir, too. I convinced myself I'd misidentified the tree. The forest canopy was dense. From this distance, small shifts in angle could hide features. That evening, the light came on earlier than usual, before sunset, and it wasn't just one window. Two glowed now. The second was faint, like a lamp in a back corner. I radioed again. Static. I adjusted the frequency. Nothing. The radio had worked that morning. I'd checked in. I stepped outside onto the narrow walkway encircling my cab. The forest below was still. No wind, no insects. When I looked back across the valley, the other tower seemed aligned differently, not rotated, not dramatically shifted, just slightly more square to me than before. as if its windows faced me directly now. They hadn't before, I was sure of that. I remembered the angle, the way I'd had to lean slightly left to see inside clearly. Now it looked as if it had been built to face me. That night, I dreamt the distance between us shortened like a tightening rope. In the morning, I tested something. I took a photograph with my phone, zoomed fully in of the other tower. Then I compared it to one I'd taken on my first day. In the older photo, the tower occupied a small portion of the frame. In the new one, it filled more of it, even accounting for the same zoom level. I checked metadata, same lens settings, same digital zoom. The only difference was the date. I walked down the stairs of my own tower, counting each step as I went. 32. At the base, I turned toward the service trail that wound down the ridge. I knew it by heart now. It curved left around a boulder, then descended sharply before leveling near a dry creek bed. I walked to the boulder, but the path didn't curve left. It continued straight. I stood there for several seconds, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with memory. The boulder was there. The trees were there. But the trail cut forward through brush I was certain had been undisturbed. I told myself I was misremembering orientation. I'd only been here a week. Forests looked similar from multiple angles. I walked forward. After 5 minutes, I realized I could no longer see my tower through the trees. That had never happened before. No matter where I'd stood along the ridge, I could always glimpse its upper glass cab rising above the canopy. Now, there was only green. A tightness spread through my chest. I turned back. The trail behind me seemed longer than it should have been. When I reached the boulder again, I looked up. My tower stood above me exactly where it should have been, and across the valley. The other tower was no longer across the valley. It stood on the adjacent ridge, not a mile away, not even half a mile. Close enough that I could see the grain of the wooden railing without binoculars. Close enough that I could see movement inside the lit window. A shadow passing once, slowly, from left to right. I did not climb back up immediately. I stayed at the base, watching. The light inside the other tower flickered, then steadied. I forced myself up the stairs of my own, counting each step again. 32. At the top, I closed the door and locked it, though I wasn't sure what that would accomplish. Through the glass, the other tower loomed far nearer than it had ever been. It occupied nearly a quarter of my view now. Its windows faced mine directly. The light inside was warm and steady, and through it, I could see the interior clearly. A desk, a chair, a cot, a circular metal mount in the center of the room, identical to mine. On the desk, I could see a notebook, open. A small shape rested on the page. I lifted my binoculars. The shape was a phone, propped upright, facing outward, as if taking a photograph. I lowered the binoculars slowly. The radio crackled behind me. I spun. Static resolved into a voice. "Lookout 7, do you copy?" I grabbed it, relief flooding through me. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I copy." "We're showing your tower offline," the voice said. "Signal's been coming from the old decommissioned post instead. You sure you're in the right structure?" I laughed, a thin, strained sound. "Yes," I said again. "I'm in the right one." There was a pause. "You're registered in Tower 8, the voice replied. "7's been empty 15 years. The line went dead. I stood there, radio in hand, listening to the quiet. Across the ridge, the other tower's light flicked off. The windows went dark. In the reflection of my own glass, I saw the forest behind me. And faintly, very faintly, a warm amber glow from inside the room.